Welcome to this video, which continues our investigation to investigate whether there are big cats here in Northern Ireland. Now, if you watched the first video, you will know that we're focusing this search in this particular northeastern area of Northern Ireland, north of Lough Neagh. And there are two raised areas either side of where we are focusing our search. One is the Sparrow out to the west, and one is the Glens of Antrim to the east, and there's a raised area in the middle. There are also two riverine valleys in this region, the Ban south of Coleraine down to Lough Neagh. Now, as you can see, this area is heavily forested, and although it's largely agricultural land, so around here Ballymoney and Coleraine, but you can see that there are many areas where it's possible for an individual to move between the forested areas shown here with limited really need to actually leave the forests. Sometimes it might be a mile or a kilometer between different parts of the forest, and it's very easy to see these, often along the river valleys or coming down from the high ground. Now, particularly focus that there are some very large wooded areas in the centre. And if you were to look at Garvan in the west, at the bottom of the screen to Dunloy, it's a matter of about 18 miles by road. So now this particular video is going to take a look at an investigation into one of these small forests which is found along one of these lines. Here you can see a particular target area here. It's been chosen because of its proximity. It's on one of these potential paths between the two main forested areas. And you can see the rivers and the marshy bog areas, which are really heathland, marked out in blue and in purple here. And you can see here at dusk that there are more trees going up through the bogs. I call this a marshy island because that's really what it was. I've been out to that particular island and it's quite treacherous, and there's a badger set on that island built into kind of an eroding cliff escarpment, I suppose. That area of heath and bog, which is quite significant, separates this area of the forest and this area of the countryside from a major highway. The main section of the forest, as you can see here, is relatively large, but there's some other areas very close by, and although there's a few fields between them, it is about a 2-minute walk between the two, and there are sunken areas of rivers which tend to link them together with some heavy reed beds. So this makes an ideal spot to search. Now, this being said, this particular forest I have visited before. Now, this particular forest was of interest to me for one particular reason, and that's because I had some unusual experiences in this particular area. Now, the time that I went in, I found something very unusual, which was a very large human-looking piece of feces. What was strange about it, it was the size and the colour. It seemed to be dyed purple, and I remember at the time I was utterly confused by this. I spoke to some people I knew about it who were medical, and they said, well, this is often a sign of a human who's got some sort of gastrointestinal issue. Now, I don't quite know why that would be. At the time I thought maybe they've been eating berries, but it was about March to April, not a time known for, it's not blackberry season, where most of the berries in the UK seem to emerge from, and blackberries and bilberries and similar reddy blue fruits. So the other thing that happened to me here, I found a few bones, and there was a sparrowhawk perch where you could see where it fed. But what really interested me here is that there was a very strange feeling like I was being watched. Suddenly I had this sense, I've had it a few times in my life, where you suddenly feel like there's danger, or there's something negative there, almost like a spiritual energy. And I remember feeling that and thinking, no, I'm going to push through this. So I found lots of things like bones and other things like that lying around. So I thought, once I've begun this investigation, this would be a good place as well to check out in terms of the areas that animals are using in terms of transition. Something else to note here is that the area between the two forests, there's about 4 fields here. They are owned by the landowner who owns this forest, and they keep bulls. They have some bulls who travel between these 4 forests. Now, beyond both rivers are sheep. That's a different piece of land. They're, in fact, owned by different people, and there are sheep there. So there is often sheep to the field at the top corner of the screen, if you look up in the top corner, and also beyond that river. And that river is quite a sizable obstacle. It's about 20 feet across, so it shows you what that kind of obstacle is. There's also a fenced area going around the forest and along each section of the river. Now here you can see some of the fence posts which are separating the forest from the farmer's land, and there you can see there are the bulls. There's just quite a large number of them, about 20 of them in total. Now down to the investigation itself and the photographs and videos I took when I entered the forest. The first one, as you can see, this is how I entered. It's very possible that a farmer has gone in through this kind of man-sized hole. Here's a closer look at the entrance as I got closer, and you can see the dip in the ground between the 2 rows of trees in the center of the picture. This is a plantation forest, which means it will be logged probably in the next 10 years. And as you can see, there's a dip between the 2 rows of trees to allow water to drain through. The trees in this forest, although there are some non-planted trees, these are predominantly non-native Northern European spruce trees. Here we see the environment as the path continues along. You can see that there's some gaps between the trees which are visible when you see it from above. And in between the forested areas there are open areas which are filled with water. These drainage ditches drain down into another ditch in between the main banks of the trees, and you can see that this is quite full of rich vegetation. It's well watered, and they're marginal plants largely growing there. Again, it's not so easy to pick up, but there's a trail starting to emerge even across this relatively littered environment. You see through the leaf litter or the pine needles, there's the trail starting to emerge. So as I traveled, I logged everything that I came across, including this small piece of dropping, but it was a vertebra from a small creature. Here's a closer look, and you can see in terms of the scale of the pine needles here, or they're actually spruce, as I mentioned before. You can see roughly the size. So it's quite a small creature. This is the post where I had seen the sparrowhawk before, and in my previous visit, so I went back to this place. So as I continue on the trail, now in this picture we can see that there is a significant amount of small creatures using this trail, and you can see many of their marks in the mud as we go through a boggier area of the trail. You see some scratch marks, which to me would imply there were badgers present in this particular spot. And then I found something which I didn't expect, which is, it was a human footprint, and you can see the top of it. It almost looked like there was a row of toes. So there, roughly in the middle of the screen, would be where the big toes seem to be. And but the issue is it has a heel, and the heel is quite distinct from and separated from the front of the foot, it would appear. So I mean, to me, it made me think, well, it's a boot of some form. But I did take a picture because I thought it showed that there's humans in there coming into that wood, but it was just an unusual footprint. And here we see that there's more active wildlife taking place. Here there's droppings of various types. There's feeding sites here on some of the cones which are coming from the trees. Just to give you an impression, here you can see where the badger has been digging. Now here there's more footprints, but this time it looks like an animal, and roughly in the center of the screen there's a pine cone just a little bit above it, a few inches above it, but it seemed to be moving towards the top corner of the screen.
Yeah.
And again we show sign of badgers here and feeding squirrels, which the badgers are digging up and scratching away at the ground to try and get worms to come up, and the squirrels obviously eating the pine cones or the contents of them. And here you see that badger is present again in this area. It's scratching away at the surface of the ground. And then this suggests to me that there's badgers present, and maybe many of the marks that I found in this forest were badgers. And you can see by that this is a very wet dropping, and that's usually because badgers feed heavily upon worms, and so you can often tell by the consistency. More badger tracks. Now this is a difficult picture to see, although it looked like a human footprint or a series of human footprints.
This looks very like a human footprint, but not quite. The big toe there, you can't see it. It's a shadow. Row of toes. And that looks like where the heels come from. But I mean, that's maybe about the size of my foot. But that is a strange footprint to find barefoot in the middle of the woods here. Very odd. Such light here. It's difficult to actually get any grip on what it actually looks like. And from out here, there's the heel to the right, and the left is the toes.
So I followed this particular trail along into the woods. A bit further along you can see there are quite a few branches, and it gets thicker and more difficult to negotiate as you go further in. Now as I went further in, more of these footprints became apparent, and here you can see quite a strange looking footprint, which is of a similar nature, but you can see it because of the shadow. It's not so bright as in the last one, and it's clearer to see. Now there is something very strange about this. I think personally there's a double impression taking place, which may explain a lot of it.
Wow, but that does actually look here like a big toe, and then lots of other toes around. Almost like that there's 2 feet go down there together, 2 prints over each other. It looks like a giant footprint, although it'd be far too long, because one heel goes there, but it looks very toe-like.
And here you can see another still of the picture. You can hopefully see the toes at the top of the screen. If you can't, this shows you roughly what I was seeing, and you can make out the toes much more clearly here.
The pattern of movement would suggest if you follow the path around there, and apart from my footprint, which is a big one, up there, that footprint, whatever it was, that was made by a man or something, because it had to move around, because it couldn't get underneath there, but the fox would have done.
Here, as you can see, the path, it gets thicker and thicker as we go in. It's quite a well-worn path here, and there's a lot of stinging nettles around. So if you don't live in Europe and you don't know what a stinging nettle is, they carry a strong pH which will burn and irritate the skin quite strongly. It can set off reactions if very severe, and it's generally quite unpleasant, although it will usually stop tingling after a couple of hours at most.
Possible toe marks, heel mark, there's a jump.
And here you can see another of these footprints that I found as I went through. And if you can't see the toes, hopefully that will make it easier for you to see what I could see. And you can see that the heel seems to be separated. Now, this is another interesting thing. This is the first skull I found on my trip, and it's a small sheep skull. Now, although there are sheep present, they are separated from this forest by a few quite significant obstacles, 2 barbed wire fences and a large river. Now, what I didn't realize is that this would be the first of many skulls and other sections of carcass that I found just randomly scattered throughout the woods. I then began to find large amounts of eggshells and snail shells, which seem to have been bunched together in close proximity. Now, these are pigeon eggs, and here as I got deeper into the woods I found more. It's a very small print. It seemed to be a different print to the other one. Again, lots of eggshells along the path. Now, they were all along the path. None of them were deeper into the woods or under the trees. They were all along the path. This is another snail shell, but the snail shells and the eggshells all seem to be very close together. Here you can see like a collection of them, and this is possible that they had fallen from a nest. However, the thing that interested me is that they tended to be in the same location, so maybe taken by martins or something similar. Another snail shell here, see where it's been cracked open. And then some sheep wool. It was wet and it was old and it smelt pretty bad. Here again we see some prints which are quite unusual and I didn't really understand. Here you can see that there seems to be a separation between the front and the back of the footprint. As I continued, as you can see, there were feathers everywhere, show signs that a predator has killed a bird, likely a fox. Here's where I came across something that I didn't quite understand or expect here. It was really a pile of stones. As you can see here, some of them have fallen off, but they've been collected from around the woods perhaps, or from close by, and have been built into like a little tower, a little pile. So this is something that interested me. I wasn't too sure why somebody was doing that, but maybe the person that owns the land was going around doing this, so he knew where he was in his own forest. See here, right by the fence post, close to where I found this pile of stones, there was a chewed bone. It looks like a limb bone, and it looks like the marrow has been taken out, and you can see gnaw marks across the bone itself. There was another bone of a similar nature very close by. Here is a close-up of some of the feathers I found lying around. You can see actually here where what's likely a pigeon, maybe the parents of or one of the chicks from the eggs. It's something similar, a much smaller animal. It's likely a young pigeon, maybe a fledgling had fallen from its nest. Here is a small piece of a spine. It was relatively small. It wasn't a large animal. And then there was something that I didn't expect. Right in the middle of my trail, as I'm walking along, I found a fresh, recently passed away sparrow hawk. It was so fresh, in fact, that rigor mortis hadn't set in. It wasn't warm, but I bagged it, collected it for evidence, and I did notice that rigor mortis hadn't yet set in. Now, often one of the first things that happens when a creature dies is that it begins to bloat and the eyes are often consumed by bacteria or insects, but it was still intact. It was completely fresh. Personally, I was a bit upset to see this because I'm a bit of a twitcher myself. I enjoy birds in their natural habitat, and this was the male sparrowhawk that I might have seen the previous time I was in this forest, 18 months before. Here you can see that there was a tree pushed down, so that took my attention. There's nothing particularly interesting other than the fact that there was other seemingly large footprints right by the fallen tree. You can see here like something's put some weight on it. So I found that quite interesting in itself. As you can see here, another tree very close by, snapped off at the bottom. This isn't recent. And another tree close by seemed to have been gnawed away at the bottom of the trunk. Something had been eating the trunk. That did suggest to me it could be deer, although there's not supposed to be deer in this area. This particular group of trees seemed to have all the branches broken off at the bottom. I wasn't aware what could have done this or why. The other trees in the wood didn't have this same phenomena, but I thought it was of interest, so I recorded it. As you can see here, I collected the main carcasses of interest, an example of each. What's very interesting here is the fact that there is a fox. A fox is amongst the creatures that has been preyed upon here. The possibility of a small deer is also interesting because this suggests that there may be deer passing through here. And this is further evidenced by the fact that at least one tree that I discovered seemed to have had the bark chewed off at the bottom. Now here is where I left the part of the forest there, and I started to move, follow the trail along the side of the brook, which, if you go back to the video, is to the north of the forest. It's difficult to see, but there are small fish in this brook. They're likely trout from my memory, what I can remember, and shows that there are probably larger fish in the main section of the river. So following the main trail along, you can see that there is a game trail leading through different parts into the shadow of the main section of the forest, which is just in front of us. Here you can see more clearly the entrance to the forest, and here again you can see where some branches have been broken down.
Predator has been here. Just now, looking at the size of that, you can see it's a limb joint. That looks like a scapula, a shoulder blade. So it's the arm of something that's been taken here. So that's the upper arm, the shoulder joint. So that thing has been brought here as a one unit and consumed by a medium size or something. It's not going to be a huge predator get in here, but something has killed that sheep.
The large number of creatures which are being fed upon suggests that this particular patch of woodland could be being used by a large predator as it travels from one part of the country to another. Although there are sheep in the fields nearby, there is a significant series of obstacles to prevent them from entering the forest, and it would be much more likely that they would drown in the river, which is of some size. However, further investigation is necessary, including camera trapping and baiting, and further investigations later on in the year. Have a look at what I've just found. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe. And don't forget, leave a comment. Let me know what you think is taking place in this section of woodland.